Welcome to Wind, Reel, and Print, or Rap, or insert soundbite here. My name's Ryan.
And my name is Kevin.
Today we're going to talk about a recent to us recording this podcast, but by the time this comes out, you've probably seen it. You've probably already had all the conversations, and maybe you even forgot about it already. But Civil War is the movie we're going to talk about. The highest budget A24 film, and with that comes a number of strings that A24 maybe hasn't necessarily had to deal with in the past. When a lot of money's on the line, there are certain risks you usually do not take. But it seems, according to all available information, that it was a success. And so we'll probably see more things like Civil War in the future. The question is that a good thing? And sorry, I'm being too presentery right now. But I think it'd be good for us to kind of give just some of our general thoughts, I think, on it. I think that for me, wasn't for me in some ways. I had some issues with some of the speaking on political issues and also like saying out one corner of I forgot what the saying is, but it's like out one corner of your mouth one thing and another thing. Yeah. And this is one of those things where it's like not political, but by not being political, it is political. Yeah. And it is saying something. Right. And in Alex Garland does have a certain style of filmmaking, and they are commentaries. Like the films he make are commentaries. Very much so. Yeah, and so this still very much fits a Garland film, and I might just not be the biggest fan of Garland films. I wasn't a big fan of Ex Machina either. It just feels like some of them are they are empty in a certain way. And as I've seen more of like Garland's interviews since I've seen the movie, I have now gotten a perspective into his political ideologies, and so that begins to influence me, and what he says was the intention behind different things that he did in the film, that it makes me see it in a certain way and get frustrated by it. Right. And also, another frustrating thing, but it's also a nice thing, if I really want to separate myself from the movie, is like there is such a great promise to the premise. And I do really like this idea, and I was sold on the trailer, and I was very excited to see it. A lot of Garland's films have that aspect to it.
What is the premise, by the way?
Oh, the premise. What is this movie about? Yeah. It is not about the 1860s event that happened. This is the film that came out in the year of our Lord, 2024. The film follows a group of, I guess, combat photographers, war photographers, war journalists, as they are going through the different combat zones on their way to interview the president in D.C. And I should say the president is not the president of the entire United States anymore. There are different parts of the nation that are warring. There is, basically, it was Texas and California grouped together as the Western forces versus, I think they were just called the United States still. And the goal of the president is to bring them back into it. And, he's losing. Yeah. And the Western forces are on their way to storm Washington, D.C. And we follow a road movie, basically on our way there. And we also, I should pull this up right now, but we follow Kirsten Dunst's character, Lee, and a number of other kind of war photographers that kind of fill different aspects of the story. But the main other character is
Kaylee Spaney.
Exactly, which is they are the newcomer to it. They are young. They pretty early on make a serious mistake and get hurt. And Kirsten Dunst is like laying down the kind of the rules of engagement for this sort of thing. Like, you wear a vest, you do these things. I don't want to see you until you're wearing that vest. And pretty soon they do meet up together, and the journey really at the core of this, and what I think is the good core of it, is a story about the old guard and the new guard. What lessons can be learned and in some ways how nothing is learned.
Right.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's a great starting point. Like, I'm curious, like, what exactly you mentioned you saw the trailer and had certain expectations. Like, what were you expecting coming in, and what did you get out of, describing the Garland movie? Like, what is, aside from it being empty and all that, like, what does that kind of mean for you?
Yeah. Well, a Garland movie obviously it does have a certain look to it. There are those aspects of it, but in certain story senses, it's a lot of times. And I should also clarify, I've not seen Men and Annihilation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm going from just Ex Machina and this film.
Right.
But it does feel like they're social commentaries that are in some ways quiet, reflective, and it felt like there was this movie definitely does a point of like having it be quiet at times, and then it basically like blows things up. I mean, and in a literal sense, that's what it's doing.
Sure.
And so that's kind of how I see Garland. Obviously, he's a British person making movies, and especially this one, about America. And naturally, I think a lot of people in other countries are going to the American ideology kind of bleeds into a lot of these things. So he still probably has a perspective. I thought going into this movie that I guess I just had higher hopes that there was a stronger core, where we could really live with the Lee and Jesse characters.
Right.
And had it be even more about them, and how it wouldn't feel so much like a bunch of events that in some ways, some of them don't feel like they any lesson is learned in a number of places. A lesson could have been learned, but by the end of the movie, by like basically the act 3, there is it's a totally different movie at that point. It feels like,
for sure,
and that I understand, and that's more interesting. It didn't feel like that we earned that. I wish there was just a deeper emotional core, and I think I like Kirsten Dunst a lot, but this character at the very least was just kind of expressionless, not really much behind the glass.
Sure.
It kind of felt like this kind of character, and to talk about the intentionality of that, I get it. There is a wall that has to be put up by these kind of characters.
Sure.
But I guess I was just seeing more of that, and more like when things happen, like a serious accounting of those events and how that affects the relationship of those two characters.
Right.
Like how like a strain is created or a bond is created.
Right.
And there certainly they did it a little bit at the beginning, and then they did something at the end. But it felt like there was like
there's no progression.
It felt like it was missing that for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think I had mentioned this before of like, maybe Garland shouldn't have made it an ensemble piece and should have made it a character study.
Yeah.
Like, centered on those characters more.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you would have been able to pull out more from that relationship rather than like splaying yourself across so many different narratives and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because then you just get like half-baked storylines across the board that just don't feel like palpable.
But the promise of the premise was good. Like I did think there's a really good idea in there.
Right.
It just was done in what I'm guessing is I need to watch more of his films to really say it, but I think it is a Garland way of doing things. It's shiny. It has a really great premise, but it feels like I just want just more emotional core and more earning of that act 3. I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair assessment. Like that's like a similar reaction I had to Men. Just like, it feels like it's supposed to be commentary, but then the actual message doesn't really punch in the way that you would expect it to be, and
Yeah.
it is very much like a visual focused film over like the story or the dialogue or whatever. And I guess like from my perspective, in general I was entertained and like I appreciated this movie, mostly because I like kind of forewent all that stuff you were talking about, because I think it's hard to make a film like to make this kind of statement all encompassing in one through line, you know? It's like there's so many different ways of approaching this, and I feel I also mentioned this before, like I hope it spawns more films within this like space that like tackle this similar subject matter. I just like the way this movie framed America, the dystopian aspects of America, as something that was present versus like a future reality. Like it didn't feel like they were dressing up too much of the locations. Like it felt like we were just shooting what it was and then maybe adding a little bit of effects and to like accent it. But it so much of the film felt more set in reality versus set in some alternate reality. And we were kind of mentioning that before too, of like maybe that hurts the film more than it helps, you know, like it doesn't separate the audience isn't able to separate our reality from the movie as much to allow for critical thinking about like these subjects, about like the political things. And there is something, you know, to say of like trying to make an apolitical movie. Like even being apolitical is a political choice.
It's so true.
You know, and you can still see that within Civil War. Like he's using American political aesthetics to try to like imbue this story that is at the same time not related to American politics.
Yeah.
It just feels very like wrong or like performative or
it does. Like when they're name dropping like the Antifa massacre, for example, it's like, oh my God, like this is so you made this up.
Right.
And so the intent is there to have this, but I think he is even saying that, I think he's playing off his own prior, what his actual political beliefs are, maybe what even he thinks about Antifa, to even assume that is like a capable thing of like something that's never done, like a massacre like that. It's kind of like an insane jump to make. And so
and if anything, massacres are right.
Yeah, exactly. Like usually, and obviously there have been plenty in the past, but if we're talking about like the American reality now, you couldn't be further from the truth in a lot of ways. But he puts it in there and then just keeps moving on. And it's like I got like just like whiplash from that. And it was hard to.
Or the soldier with the painted nails and the dyed hair.
It's
trying to say something, but it doesn't really go there.
It's it's interesting because it also isn't even like. There's a huge lack of women just in general in the combat portions of this. I think once we get to the assault on Washington D.C., it kind of changes. But just in general, there is like this feeling of like these aren't even like us in a lot of ways. It doesn't even feel like what a civil war would be. This feels like just a bunch of people playing war. You know, it feels like a movie about people playing war and the filmmakers playing war and not even knowing what that means. I think something we haven't talked about before about this, I have a lot of beef with the Act 3 of this, and especially that like assault on Washington D.C. with those big walls and that whole battle that kind of happens out there. It felt to me, yes, this is the most big budget A24 movie ever made. It felt so cheap. It felt like, and it didn't make any sense, and it was just like these weird sheer concrete walls, and maybe these exist, but it just felt so set. And like how do we? And we're rolling, and then we're just kind of slowly like blowing things up. And there's also like, such a lack of humanity for even like the people being killed. And that's kind of an aspect of it. And I think that's a statement it made early on was like, lives don't really matter in a way. with the way Kirsten Dunst's character is like shooting the person being lit in flames and things like that. That is a statement, and especially at the end, that's a statement. Like,
oh yeah,
nothing matters. I also just had a hard time believing that he was going to be able to like stop those people before they shot the president. Like,
oh yeah,
like be like, hey, I need to get a word in, and then listening finally, even though they weren't listening at all, they're like, stay out of our way. At that moment, it felt so. In some ways, it felt a lot like the end of a Christopher Nolan movie. I think Christopher Nolan movies are better, but a Christopher Nolan film where it just feels like at the end he has to shoehorn some clever messaging.
Yeah. It's the gotcha suckers.
Yeah, it's the gotcha suckers of Bowfinger. Exactly. The Bowfinger method.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was just another aspect of this where I was like, just had a hard time getting in on it.
Yeah.
I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Like, the ending felt like very bow-tied and like, we're going to wrap this up the way you expect it to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd imagine that in it does feel like they almost started with the ending and moved backwards in a way. Or they had all these scenes in mind and then they strung it together. Like, it just doesn't feel like there was this
through line.
Yeah, this like, I mean, yeah, but I do kind of understand, like, it said what it wanted to say. Yeah. I think I will give it that. Like, it did say it. I just didn't like the way they said it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree, at least from a story aspect, that like it doesn't really go to where it needs to.
Yeah.
I think maybe it is the subject matter. Like, if you're gonna make a film about this, you really have to like come in swinging.
Yeah,
you can't really pull your punches on this. Like, the way Come and See is like so direct with its subject matter. Like, I feel like you need to be like that with this particular space. It's like it's so prevalent in our society, and I think this is a large, like, him being British, I think affects a lot of this, like the severity of these discussions, or like what these things mean, what these symbols and ideas mean to people in America. Like, I think that's a huge piece that's missing from this film. Like, it feels ahistorical almost.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a part of our timeline in a way.
Yeah.
Like, it's just taking things away and then like just sterilizing it. Yeah. Like, in a way to just entertain us,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that honestly is probably a great place to wrap this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good way. There is a lot to this. There's a lot to unpack, and I'll even give it that. Like, I'm happy to be talking about it, and
I'm sure I'll rewatch it and find some other stuff, because this also we'll want to mention the soundtrack.
Yeah. Of course. Yes.
Like, that idea of like war is jazz.
Yeah, I know we wanted to kind of. I think that's a really cool and interesting thing to talk about because of the fact that in jazz there aren't really any rules,
right?
And in war there really aren't any rules either.
Right.
And there is a kind of beautiful blending of those ideas,
right? That
I would love to see even some other directors like go down that path and what that means, because there could be some really interesting directions to take that.
Yeah, for sure. Because I was drawn to the idea of syncopation and how much like weaving within a rigid structure. Like, I think that's so much of what like being in the military is. Like, you're supposed to be disciplined and you're supposed to be like rigid. You have all these rules and you follow a routine. But then when you're in war, it's all that's out the window. You're kind of like going in the moment. Like, yeah, you have protocol, but then something could like separate you from the group, or like, change the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much that can change within the moment. So, and you get that within the film. Like, even as the photographers, right? They have to like dip in and out between gunfire and like explosions, and they have to know when is safe to do that, and like when to take the shot and when not to, and stuff like that, which I thought was like, super interesting.
Yeah.
And the soundtrack is like so American. Like, it does feel like it's representing American history. It's like folksy American songs, like from hip hop to like rock to like OG jazz. Like, they have different variations of the sound, but like all pointing back to like some homegrown American vibe kind of thing.
Yeah. It is interesting. This movie is looking at America from an outsider's view, and I think as Americans it is kind of strange and unique, and it takes a different thing. It's kind of like made by an alien in a way.
It's like dissociating from yourself. In a weird way. Like looking, you know how when you dream and you're like looking down on yourself.
Yep.
It's kind of
Yeah, exactly. Weird alternate universe.
Yeah.
That's the right place to actually end this.
We'll end it there.
Thanks, folks. That is a wrap.
Pew! Wind Reel in Print is a podcast by Salad Brain Productions. You can find us on Instagram at Wind Reel in Print Pod. You can also find us wherever you get your podcasts. And please, if you like the show, leave a rating and review. We'll see you next time.